Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to our special coverage covering the UK general election that was held today. Polling stations closed at 10 p.m. Local time, where around 46 million voters participated in electing 650 MPs. Early results and exit polls indicate a significant Labour victory, potentially ending 14 years of Labour, of Conservative rule, I should say. And our special envoy to London is joining us live via video conference to tell us more about the latest. Good evening, Islam.
Good evening, Mariam. Good evening, dear viewers.
Thank you for joining us. Can you tell us a little bit more about what happened today in the election?
Yes, Mariam, voting has been ongoing here in the UK in the general elections of 2024, where we have seen a high turnout here, where millions of voters cast their ballots here across the kingdom. And Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, by the way, voted in North Yorkshire, and Keir Starmer, the Labour Party leader, voted in North London. Political parties here aim to secure 326 seats in order to form a majority government. And as you said before, the Labour Party is projected to win a landslide victory over the Conservatives, according to exit polls, making Keir Starmer probably the new Prime Minister of the UK. The first result, a Labour win by Bridget Phillipson in Sunderland South, was announced just before 11 p.m. Labour is expected to secure, as you said as well, 410 seats, while the Conservatives at 131 seats as well. It seems that the latter is losing trust of the Britons, while on the other hand, on social media, Keir Starmer thanked the voters of trusting the changed Labour Party. Stay tuned for more details, Maria. Back to the studio.
Thank you very much for bringing insights to us, Islam, from London. And to discuss more about the details, we will be welcoming our panel of guests. But before that, millions of voters casted their ballots in the UK's first July general election since 1945. Brits have varying opinions about who they think will be the most suitable to lead their country, as the UK faces different challenges at home and at the international level. Nabil Khazini has more details.
The UK gears up for the general election on July the 4th. As voters prepare to head to cast their ballots and elect their government, the decision of electing a new Prime Minister is still casting shadows over the UK political landscape.
I haven't decided yet who to vote. It seems like it's more of a party thing than the actual people. So I met a lot of people that are just like kind of voting for the particular party, regardless of what that particular candidate has promised or what they're saying. So it's a little bit confusing to me. I haven't decided yet.
However, the latest polling data indicate a significant lead for Labour Party, which is predicted to secure a majority in the parliament against the Conservatives, who are expected to see a dramatic reduction in their seats, while other smaller and emerging parties, including Liberal Democrats, UK Reform and Green Party, are potentially gaining momentum during these elections. Key policy areas will likely reflect the voter sentiment, which revolve around economic recovery, healthcare, immigration, climate change, foreign policies orientations and Brexit impact.
Brexit has impacted our economy. It's taken away our freedom of movement. So our economy now, we're on a loss of about a turnover of about 100 billion a year from being in the European Union, which equates to about 40 billion a year in tax revenue. And of course, the taxes are, the revenue isn't coming in now, so we now have the highest tax take for over 70 years. We're replacing what was lost from being in the European Union.
I believe Labour's going to win. My view is a lot of older people are worried because it's like, well, we can't trust the Conservatives because of all what happened through COVID, but we don't trust Labour because they're all for so-called foreign work and what have you, which I don't know. Britain has always been multicultural, so people need to remember that.
The war on Gaza catches global attention. Some British voters see no substantial shift from their government's previous stance over this issue.
Well, so the problem we have here, and again this is a problem throughout the West, is that the people are opposed to Israel's genocide in Gaza in significant numbers. But the leadership throughout most of Western Europe, there are a few exceptions, are fully supportive. And these are not just the governments, but the opposition parties. If Labour replaces the Tories tomorrow, we're just replacing one supporter of Israel's genocide with another supporter of Israel's genocide.
Across the globe, it is clear that this election is shaping up to be one of the most contentious and closely watched in recent history.
And so to discuss more about the outcomes of the election, its impact and what's at stake, I'm joined by Pippa Catterall, Professor of History from London. Thank you for joining us, Pippa.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you very much. And we're also welcoming Mark William Lover, International Relations Expert from Scotland. Thank you again.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you very much. And to start with, Mr. Lover, I want to ask you about the reasons of the dissolution of the Parliament in May in the first place.
Well, I think that it was perfectly clear to Sunak that a lot of faith in the Conservative Party had been lost. And it was very, very much a gamble, trying to play on that precise moment, a gamble. And it was a gamble that simply did not pay dividends of any sort whatsoever, if not to the opposition. So what we do have now is this rather interesting scenario in which, once again, after many, many years of one party, we're entering a completely new chapter. This is, in a certain sense, history that repeats itself, and a number of lessons can be learned from this. The Conservative Party were in power for 14 years. During which, I think, if my memory serves me correctly, we had 5 different prime ministers, 3 of which in the last 5 years alone. So it's perfectly clear that the voters were absolutely losing any form of faith, any form of trust in the Conservative government.
Understood. So with that said, what do the exit polls suggest about the public sentiment towards the current government, in your opinion?
Well, your correspondent, Islam Sid, made a very, very important, in my opinion, a very, very important comment. And let me just link into what he said about public sentiment. I think that Keir Starmer, the Labour Party, have to be very, very careful. Basically, if the exit polls are correct, and by now they are very, very scientific, they're very, very reliable, so in all probability, Starmer is the new Prime Minister. But what he has to be absolutely clear about is the fact that he has to understand the difference between having been elected because there was a great faith in the Labour Party, or he was elected because there was massive delusion as regards the Conservative Party. What this means basically is that the Labour Party will have to be very, very careful, because it would not take too much for the trust that has, again, presumably, because we still don't have the definitive results, but they have to be very, very careful and have to realize that a large part of this potential landslide victory is based not on support for Labour, but is based on those that vote being somewhat delusioned by, being somewhat unhappy with the past performance of the Conservative Party. So support is wide, but it's shallow. Wide but shallow. And the Labour Party would be very well advised to remember that and to act and to tread very, very carefully.
Thank you very much. Now to you, Pippa Catterall, how significant are these early elections compared to previous elections?
It's going to be less of a landslide than Tony Blair won in 1997, and it feels totally different from that particular event. In 1997, there was hope, and people were voting for Labour with a degree of enthusiasm to get rid of, in that case, 18 years of Conservative rule. This time we've had 14 years of Conservative rule. As your other correspondents just said, over the last 2 or 3 years in particular, the Tories, the Conservatives, have been extremely unpopular. They've been well behind in the polls for the last 2 years as they've staggered from scandal to scandal. There's been complaints about the underfunding of health services, crumbling public services, sewage in rivers. Nothing seems to work, quite apart from the economic travails that your correspondent was drawing attention to. So in all of these circumstances, to some extent, all Labour had to do was not make a mess of the campaign, and they were likely to win, simply because the Conservatives have lost this election. Sunak had the chance to call the election at a time of his own choosing. For some reason, he decided to go for July, and much to the surprise of his party, he went for it in such a way that somehow Labour managed to spot that he was doing it. They bought up the advertising revenue for all the advertising slots for things like social media. So not only did the Conservatives go into the campaign with well behind in the polls, but they also then fought an ill-conceived campaign, and the situation has simply got worse for them. Having said that, the situation also seems to have got worse for Labour. So the exit poll is well below some of the polls over the last week or so, which suggested Labour were going to be getting 450 or more. The polls, it's not that the polls have particularly narrowed vis-à-vis the Conservatives, it's that the other smaller parties, particularly Reform, have been better than predicted. So Reform have come second in all of the seats which have so far been declared. And if you look at the Labour polling in all of those seats, they're all seats in the northeast of England, then the Labour poll is actually down on 2015 and 2017, I think, and it's more or less the same as it was in 2019, the last election. So this is not a surge for Labour. It's more that the Tories have lost the election really badly.
Right. And what are the historical, if we want to talk about history, the historical implications if the Labour Party wins tomorrow?
The Labour Party has been predicted to win for a long time, so the civil service will have prepared for it. They will have briefs ready for the incoming ministers. They'll have read the manifestos to work out what the priorities of the Labour Party are when they come into office. One of the things which has been noticeable during the campaign is that Starmer and his team have been fairly cautious on a huge number of issues. So there's not a lot of detail to go on. I think to some extent they've been rightly cautious because they haven't known just how much of a mess the Conservatives have made of the nation's finances. And obviously, if you don't have money, it's quite difficult to do new policies. So they've been trying to avoid making commitments. If you look at defence policy, for instance, they've just said, well, we're going to have a strategic defence review, which makes sense. But it's hardly the kind of thing to set pulses racing. They haven't made radical promises in terms of we're going to build the 40 new hospitals that the Conservatives promised to build and never did. They haven't made major commitments on infrastructure spending. They've deliberately closed down any promises on rejoining or even looking for a closer relationship with Europe beyond some kind of vague promises. And to some extent, they've made pledges that they probably didn't need to make. Like Starmer the other day said that he didn't see Britain rejoining the EU within his lifetime. when you're already ahead in the polls, you don't need to make commitments like that, but it might mean that they're going to be boxed in terms of what their room for manoeuvre is, because as soon as they start to change tack, people will say, but that's not what you said during the election. You don't have a mandate to do that. So I think to some extent, my colleague from Scotland was saying they're likely to be cautious. I think there are a number of reasons why they might be cautious, but I think they've possibly been too cautious during the election campaign, which has meant they haven't enthused their voters. And the number of people I know who are long-time Labour supporters who found it quite difficult to vote for them. In those circumstances, they do need to give people a sense that this really is a change, and that they are going to not just be stable and competent, but also give people something to look forward to.
Right. Pippa, I want to ask you another question. As we're all seeing and hearing, there is a rise of the far right in Europe. Is that also the case for the UK? Is it a reality, or is just propaganda?
No, it's a reality. If you look at the predicted poll share of reform, for instance, there, I think, on something like 17-18%, they're predicted to pick 13 seats. Because their vote is fairly evenly spread in lots of places, that a large vote doesn't necessarily mean they're going to win many seats. So the Liberal Democrats, whose vote is much more concentrated and who have fought essentially a campaign of let's try and win about 50 seats, are likely to win many more seats than Reform. But Reform are coming second to Labour in a number of places. That means that when we get to the next election, it's going to feel in a number of places that it's Reform who are the real challengers. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to kick on in the way that Marine Le Pen has in France, because Nigel Farage, the party leader, is quite lazy. He's a charismatic figure, but whether he'll put in the legwork to really develop the party in the way his French counterparts have remains to be seen. He, however, is likely to win a seat in Clacton in this election. We'll find out probably in about 3 hours' time, and that means that he will have a platform in Parliament, but that also means that there's going to be more scrutiny of them and of the rather messy promises that they've made to the electorate, and that might mean that this could be their high water mark rather than a stepping stone to greater things, because the electoral system here is so different to France.
Right. Before continuing our discussion, Pippa and Mark, let's watch this report gathered by our colleague Nabil Khazemi.
As the sun embraced the UK's sky, a nation steered awake for a new political chapter in the United Kingdom. While 2019 may have been the Brexit election, few Brits see it as a top issue this time round. In 2024, the cost of living tops the list of concerns for voters, with 45% of Britons saying it is one of the most important issues in deciding their vote.
I know we definitely do need change, and I think what we're going to have now, hopefully that will work. The only problem is I think there's going to be a lot of changes. There are a lot of issues coming up that I don't know if we're going to be able to fix. But I think what we've got at the moment is not going to fix anything anyway, because they're just out for themselves.
There's no definite, yes, I'm definitely going this way, because neither of them are giving me anything positive. nothing that I really want to think, oh yeah, great, it's going to make our country great again.
A lot has happened since the Conservative Party entered coalition in 2010. 5 prime ministers, 4 election cycles, 2 UK-wide referendums. 14 years of ruling is about to end, as exit polls suggest Labour Party will take the lead in the UK. This might offer a bit of a change that some in the United Kingdom want for their country.
Oh, honestly, Brexit probably. I don't think I would ever vote Conservative again after the Brexit vote. Boris Johnson, Liz Truss, totally destroyed any confidence that I had in the party. And a party that I was a member of for quite a long time.
At this point, it doesn't even matter, but I mean, Labour obviously predicted to win. Personally, I prefer the Greens, but the Conservatives have got to go. They've just done so much damage, and they should have never even been there in the first place. And at this point, my anger is just not even, I can't even put into words.
The shift in the political landscape in the United Kingdom marks a pivotal moment with perhaps important changes for the UK in at least the next 5 years.
So, given the numerous crises and scandals, how crucial is this election for the British people who are seeking change, Mr. Mark?
Well, it is absolutely critical. Amongst the number of issues that were raised in those series of interviews was the cost of living. And this is a very, very serious issue. The British voters tend, at the end of the day, to make their electoral choice on a few but very, very significant issues, such as the National Health Service, the quality of the schools, but above all else, the cost of living. And the cost of living has become an absolutely major issue. So I am not entirely convinced that promises to address the issue of the cost of living, promises made by Starmer and the Labour Party, are at the heart of this electoral decision. It is very much, I think, a case of it can't get very, very much worse. Let's change. Let's get rid of who has been in power for 14 years, has made something of a mess. It can't get worse. Let's replace them with someone else. So going back, and I don't want to repeat what Pippa said, because there's absolutely nothing to add to their comments. They were just so extremely clear and precise. But at the end of the day, more than a win for the Labour Party, it's a loss for the Conservative Party. And it is due basically to the fact that people are quite simply fed up and want to change.
Understood. Right. So how do you see the UK's foreign policy evolving post-election, and especially regarding Gaza and Europe and the potential return of Donald Trump to the White House? Well,
that's an absolutely fantastic question, because in the run-up to the elections, Starmer and the Labour Party made a series of promises, spoke on a great number of different issues that range from energy to full decarbonisation of the power grid within 2030, many mentions of infrastructure investments. We shan't raise taxes, but we will apply value-added tax to private schooling, etc., etc. All of that, but very, very little said as regards foreign policy. And on the one hand, that is something that's not too difficult to understand. But on the other hand, it's quite sort of clamorous in the sense that I would very, very much like to know how this new government, politicians that have been in the opposition for the last 14 years, are going to address a world that is changing very, very rapidly. We have a number of incredibly important crises at the moment that range from what's happening in the Near East that could very, very easily develop into a regional conflict, and this is something absolutely horrendous, We have the issue of the United States that has, time back, decided to very much leave the Middle East and focus more than anything else on the Pacific. We have the November elections. Will Donald Trump be re-elected? If Donald Trump is re-elected, then we're going to see a lot of very, very important changes. It's going to be very, very difficult for a British government to work with the historic ally, the USA. This incoming government is going to have to deal with a number of geopolitical scenarios that are very, very dynamic, that are evolving, developing day after day after day. And quite frankly, I'm a little bit concerned as to quite how well prepared they are to address these various crises in different parts of the world. So on the what is the Labour Party's foreign policy question, I think the answer is that there is no great clarity on that at all. As regards defence spending, there has been a certain amount of clarity.
Many issues have to be addressed. I want to ask you another question about how this election might influence the UK's stance on key international issues, especially in this period, like the Palestinian conflict, which has been ongoing for 9 months, and the Brexit, for example. Mr. Mark?
Sorry, I lost you for a moment. I have you back again. I don't think that's going to make any difference at all to the Gaza crisis. The Labour Party will continue with the policies that the Conservative Party adopted. So unfortunately, and I hate to say this, it gives me absolutely no pleasure whatsoever, but I very, very much doubt that there will be any changes at all to policy on what is happening at the moment in the Near East. I would very, very much have liked to have said something different, but I can't. It's as simple as that, basically. On other fronts, all I see is an absolute lack of clarity. So it's absolutely impossible for an incoming government to ignore the fact that our world is becoming more and more complicated by the day. So quite what the plan is. To actually prepare themselves for dealing with a number of scenarios remains to be seen. However, as Professor Catherine pointed out earlier on, and very, very importantly pointed out, the briefings will be ready. That which had to be studied as regards the incoming government has been studied, and so the briefings will be tailored absolutely ad hoc to the incoming government. Quite how much the briefings will influence Labour policy remains to be seen. So the only thing that we are certain of is that the briefings will be very clear, they will be very, very detailed, there will be recommendations. What remains unclear is just quite how any recommendations would then actually be taken on board and managed.
All right, thank you so much. I wish I could ask more questions, but we're running out of time. Thank you both for joining us and for accepting our invite. And thank you, dear viewers, for following this special coverage. But do stay here for more details about the election in a couple of minutes.